justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
We won't relent. We will fight until the end. We have been sent to protect and to defend.
We won't relent. We will fight until the end.
We have been sent
to protect and to defend. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river,
till only freedom is found. We count the cost.
we will pledge our very lives. All nation lost, but the kingdom will arise. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river, till only freedom is found. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river, till only freedom is found. The coastlines will know. The coastlines will know. The coastlines will know your justice.
The islands will know. The islands will know.
The islands will know your justice. The nations will know. The nations will know. The nations will know your justice. The coastlands will know. The coastlands will know. The coastlands will know your justice.
Let justice flow like a river.
Flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river, till only freedom is found. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river, till only freedom is found. We won't relent.
We will fight until the end.
We have been sent
To protect and to defend.
What is it?
Good evening. Good evening once more. Welcome to the Legal Literacy Project. Good evening to you, those who are joining us for the live stream, and all those who later on rewatch the live stream. It's very, very important. It's very important that you stay locked in and you're able to, get through the lesson. It's very, very important. Let us try to share the live stream. Let us share the live stream. Let us share this amazing work we're doing. It's very, very important. Now, I do understand that I think we started a little bit late, sort of late by a minute or so, but it's important that we're here. So today's discussion or today's lesson is going to revolve around the Zambian human rights framework. Now, specifically, we'll be focusing on the successes, the challenges, and the prospects that the legal framework here in Zambia presents as far as human rights is concerned. Human rights is a very important topic. It's a very, very important topic. If you follow through civilization and history, you would find that human rights have made a have been a very big part of civilization, and they have in fact transformed nations. They have transformed legal systems, and they have, in one way or the other, informed how we are living as a country, how the rest of the world is living as well. So this subject is very, very, very important. And maybe to just quote Rafika Andre Balunga, whose quote was part of our artwork that was circulating on Facebook and other social media platforms. You can never really have enough of them. Human rights are important, so you can never really have enough of them. Anything and everything that you can think about can actually be transformed into a human rights issue, thus making it very, very important that we understand this important subject of discussion. This is why this lesson was created, that we be informed of what really human rights are. I've heard some people say, are we really going to eat human rights as a country, when the president every now and then says, we have gone so far insofar as human rights are concerned. We've gone so far. We need, to appreciate that part. We need to appreciate that part. Thus, as a country, if we are to basically appreciate that we have got a very robust human rights framework, it would really mean so well. But people have, in fact, said, do we eat human rights? And quite frankly, if you were to look at it from a very normative angle, yes, we do eat human rights, because human rights are what actually facilitates for that. But I'll try to justify my statement in the next few minutes. So now, what are human rights? Without wasting much of your time. So the basic definition of what human rights are is that they are basically entitlements. They are entitlements that every human being has on the premise of being human. So just because you are human, just because you can be classified as being a member of the Homo sapien species, you are in fact entitled to human rights. And a lot of scholars have actually gone beyond this narrow outlook of human rights, and they've looked at it from a very broad perspective, whereby they've even incorporated, pregnancy, a child who's just been conceived, to be a part and parcel of this particular Homo sapien species, and thus necessitating that it could claim human rights entitlement, and it needs to be defended as far as human rights protections are concerned. Thus, it is very important we understand this important subject. Very, very important. And I mean, in the United States of America, there was a very famous case that was decided by the Supreme Court of the U.S., Roe versus Wade. And I think if not last year, then the other year, that case was overturned. Now, talking about human rights as well, emphasizing on their importance. So it is very, very important. So how can we talk about human rights? What can we relate to these particular rights to? I've already mentioned entitlements. They can also be called interests. They are called benefits, and they are called claims. All these are phrases that are associated with human rights. Of course, tying these benefits, tying these entitlements, tying these interests to human beings. So provided that you're a human being, you are entitled to human rights. Now, these are the general characteristics of human rights. We can say that they're inherent, they are inalienable, they are universal, they are indivisible, they are interdependent, and they are interrelated. All these descriptions, of course, they're not exhaustive. There's also non-discriminatory or non-discrimination. All those are characteristics, general characteristics, so that each and every right has. So when we say that they are inherent, you're born with them. The moment you are born, you have these entitlements. Here in Zambia, we believe that life begins at conception. That's once it is established that a particular human being has conceived, human rights protection start. So life begins at conception. That is the ideology that frames our human rights system. Thus, you see, laws being created to regulate the termination of pregnancies. If you abort here in Zambia, it's a crime because we're trying to protect the rights of this unborn baby. Because life begins at conception. And this is where you find that there's a lot of regulation when it comes to the termination of pregnancies here in Zambia. You just don't do it anyhow. And there's a whole piece of legislation that speaks to the termination of pregnancies, giving credence to this particular element that we're referring to as being human rights being inherent. Then we have inalienable. They cannot be taken away from an individual. These characteristics, of course, these characteristics have got their shifts and turns and twists, as we will see later on. But it's very important that we understand that human rights are inalienable. They can't be taken away from you. So just because you're not exercising your right to participation in politics doesn't mean that they should be taken away from you. It does not mean that. So they are inalienable. They're also universal. So wherever you go, you will have fundamental human rights. You can move from here and go to the United States of America. You will still enjoy your right to life. You can move from here, go to Congo, go to Zimbabwe, go to South Africa. You enjoy these particular rights because they are universal. This is why when you look at the text of our constitution, it does not say that these rights are going to be conferred or are protected for the Zambian people. It says for anybody who's under this particular land that we call Zambia, the coverage of Zambia itself. So it's persons, it's not citizens, it's persons. Everybody who's a part or who's in this particular territory that we're calling Zambia enjoys human rights. They are universal. They can be they're recognized everywhere. They can be enjoyed everywhere. Of course, with minor limitations and derogations every now and then. Then we have indivisibility, or the indivisibility characteristics of human rights. They can't be separated. They cannot be separated. The interdependency, they rely on each other as far as enforcement is concerned. Thus, to put it in a nutshell, violating one right ultimately affects the other rights. And vice versa, the promotion of one right, promotes the other. For example, if you promote the right to food or the right to health, you're promoting the right to life. If you promote, freedom of assessment, freedom of movement and freedom of association, there's freedom of speech there that is being protected. There's the right to dignity that is being protected, and so on and so forth. So these are the general characteristics of what we're referring to as human rights. Now, there are 3 generations of human rights that exist. These generations are categorized into the following. So the first generation of human rights relates to civil and political rights. This generation looks into rights such as the right to life, the freedom of movement itself, protection against enforced labor, protection against inhuman and degrading treatment. They all fall within this particular category of human rights. Why are they first generation? They were the first rights to be discovered, during the times of during the medieval times. Even in these regions, I think there is a video on human rights that is attached to this channel that you can look into on the historical development of human rights. But to put it in a nutshell, when codes such as the Code of Hammurabi or the Charter of Monday, those historical documents were being created. These were the first rights that were founded. No one shall be subjected to slavery. Nobody should be subjected to inhuman treatment. Slavery, inhuman treatment, forced labor, the right to life. All these were the first category of rights to be recognized, through various instruments. Then we have the second generation rights, economic, social, and cultural rights. They were the second to be recognized. Then we have the third generation of human rights, which is the solidarity rights or the collective rights relating to various groups. For example, there are rights for women, rights for persons living with disabilities, environmental rights. These are group rights. So these are the three generations of human rights that exist. This is general human rights law, and it's very, very important that you understand it. Then we have what are known as beneficiaries and duty holders in human rights law. I'll try to zoom in a bit. I don't know if we can see, but if we cannot, I'll elaborate as I explain. So there are two parties that you need to take into consideration as far as human rights are concerned. They are what are called beneficiaries, and they are duty holders. So you and I are beneficiaries because we have got a particular interest insofar as human rights are concerned. We can claim a right. So when we claim the right, we are beneficiaries. We enjoy what human rights presents. We are beneficiaries of human rights. Then those with the obligation to provide, those with the obligation to act, those with the obligation to not to act, those are referred to as duty holders. So we have the governed, who are beneficiaries, and the government, who are duty holders. So the government owes you three specific duties insofar as human rights are concerned. This is the duty or the obligation to respect your human rights, the obligation to protect your human rights, and the obligation to fulfill your human rights. When we say obligation to respect, what are we saying? The government is not supposed to act without restriction. They have to act within the confines of the law. And thus, in acting within the confines of the law, they are respecting your human rights. So when we say you have the right to move, or you have the freedom of movement, what are we telling the government? They are not supposed to interfere with that particular human right. When we say you have the right to the freedom of association, then what are we saying? The government is not supposed to put restrictions on your freedom of association. This is why you see, if you take time to read the case of Christine Mulundika and 7 others versus the people, you'll find that one of the things that were discussed in that particular notion is this obligation to respect. If the government places conditions on your enjoyment of human rights, it means that they are failing to meet their obligation to respect your human rights. So they are supposed to respect them. We are putting a clause that when they are acting, they need to act in a manner that pays this respect, in a manner that upholds your human rights and not violate your human rights. So you've got those rights that are, confined in these very important human rights instruments and legislation. Then there's an obligation to protect. What does this obligation mean? It means that the state must refrain from, interfering with or curtailing the enjoyment of your human rights. And, it stems off from respect. It stems off from respect. So when we say they have to protect your human rights, they have to protect your human rights, it basically means that this particular state must ensure that these human rights obligations, these human rights guarantees that are provided for, they are upheld. How? By ensuring that individuals are protected, by ensuring that these groups of human rights rather, are not protected, they are not violated or abused. This is why you see that there are institutions that have been created by the government, run by the government with the support of the people and the constitution to ensure that your human rights are protected. They are institutions like the police themselves. They are there to ensure that there's public order. Thus, your human rights are protected. They are there to ensure that in a situation where your human rights have been violated, you have got a channel to go to court. You've got a right to go to court and claim that your human rights have been violated. And because of the existence of that particular abuse, you'll be compensated, rightly so, because they have an obligation to do what? To protect your human rights. They need to put in safeguards that protects your human rights. They need to put in safeguards that ensure that if you are suffering as a result of an abuse, you are compensated rightly because you deserve to be compensated. That is guaranteed by the human rights instruments that are existing in this particular nation and, of course, region and the global community at large. Then there is the obligation to fulfill. What does this mean? This one now gives you and I, right? You and I, a right to claim. Remember, we said human rights gives us a right to claim. This is where that obligation, this is why that obligation and that notion really sits well with the obligation of the state. So, us as individuals, we've got a right to claim human rights. These human rights, especially human rights such as those that are belonging to the second generation of human rights, that is economic, social, and cultural. So things like the right to health, things like the right to work, those rights can be claimed from the government. If you don't have medicine in the hospitals, what do? You go to media, or you go to the courts. Generally, that is what is supposed to happen. Of course, there are limitations here in Zambia, and I will later on speak to that. But in situations where that particular right has been violated, you go to the court and inform the court, or take action in the courts of law that this particular right is not being given its status. I have a right to claim, and I'm claiming that the government is not facilitating for the enjoyment of my basic human rights. And this is why you'd find that the government has taken time and taken positive steps to create these opportunities for you to enjoy your human rights. For example, the Citizen Empowerment Act is there to ensure that you and I enjoy our economic rights. So things or programs such as CDF, and the funding that comes from there, it is because of this. They need to facilitate. They need to create an environment that allows you to enjoy human rights. So this is the third obligation that states or governments have, and we need to be aware of this. Now let us get into the very meat of our discussion today: the Zambian human rights system. Now, Zambia is not an island nation, and insofar as human rights are concerned, or just basically, or in general, Zambia is not an island, and there is no state actually that is an island. That is an island, as far as human rights regulations are concerned. What does this mean? It basically means that, insofar as human rights are concerned, and maybe general law is concerned, Zambia belongs to a community. This is the community that we're referring to as the global community, or the international community. And because of this international community has set standards. If you are able to trade and you're able to engage with us, you're able to enter into agreements with us, and so on and so forth, you are supposed to live up to a particular standard. The advisory opinion on the legal consequences of the construction of a war in the occupied Palestine territory, a case that saw itself in the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. The ICJ in that case, at paragraph 109, did in fact guide that human rights issues are not essentially domestic issues, which means that human rights, as far as human rights are concerned, we're not only dealing with what is happening here in Zambia. Even if it happens here in Zambia, it has got repercussions that can affect the international community as a whole. So the essence of human rights is beyond the borders of Zambia. It is beyond the borders of Zambia. So if human rights get violated, I will later on refer to a few cases where, individuals like you and I, sought outside help from the international community, where this particular country was not doing anything about the violation of our rights. Because human rights are not essentially regulated by domestic law. They are not. They are regulated by both domestic and international law. And we're at the international level, at the international scene, it means that Zambia is bound to what? To bring about these protections, to give life to these obligations that it has entered into. Because when you enter into a contract, generally you're supposed to do what? Fulfill what is in the text of that contract. So in the same sense, if Zambia enters into an international agreement for human rights, it has got an obligation to do what? To provide these human rights, or to facilitate for these human rights to be enjoyed. Now, insofar as there is a global community and there's the regulation and everything else, one thing that you need to understand about human rights and really appreciate is that human rights enjoyment is reliant on what is known as the concept of relativity. So what does that mean? It basically means that the enjoyment of human rights is very subjective. To the extent at which you enjoy human rights here in Zambia is very different from how you enjoy your rights in Zimbabwe. For example, if you are Zambian here and you go to Zimbabwe, you cannot claim to vote in the Zimbabwean elections because it is relative, or what is going to be considered to be within the human rights framework here in Zambia is going to be different from what is going to be considered to be within the human rights framework elsewhere. This is why you'd find that some nations have recognized that the LGBTQ community is a social group, and there are rights that are pertaining to that particular group. But here in Zambia, we have criminalized, essentially criminalized, any membership to that community. And aside from that, Uganda, as an example, has got criminal laws that prohibit even basically coming out, as they call it, identifying as a particular member of that community. It's a crime. It's a crime in Zimbabwe. It's a very serious crime. Sorry, in Uganda, it's a very, very serious crime. And if you go to other countries, it's allowed. They are human rights, and they need to be protected, and so on and so forth. So the enjoyment is it's very, very relative. It's very relative. So no matter how much people try to say that no, because there's a particular person who's pushing for these rights to be recognized here in Zambia, we don't agree with those things, and so on and so forth. We need to understand and have it at the back of our mind that the concept of relativity really guides when it comes to the enjoyment of human rights. It guides us. So if human rights are an issue, they're a topic, you need to think about to what extent exactly is our laws allowing us to enjoy these rights. Is it within what is expected of us, and so on and so forth. So relativity is very, very important. It's very relative. Even the vindication of human rights is very relative. For example, here in Zambia, you can't go to court and say my right to health has been violated, and you end there. You can't. It's impossible. It's impossible because our constitution houses the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is restrictive in nature. It's very, very restrictive. If you look at it, it only includes positive and positive rights, that is the civil and political rights, and it doesn't go beyond that. And because of this, just the concept of justiciability is very, very limited. You can only go to court if you have in limited situations as far as human rights are concerned. That's the concept of relativity is being given its ultimate purview. Now, the legislative framework. Now, the Zambian constitution is very, very important. It's very, very important. But aside from the Zambian constitution, Zambia has created a very rich legislative regulation as far as human rights are concerned. From legislation that is directly touching on human rights issues to legislation that is ensuring that human rights are protected. And there are several of them. I can give you an example. The Penal Code Act, despite it being, the main piece of legislation that we look to as far as criminal laws are concerned, in one way or the other, it protects human rights. But there are specific legislations that deal with human rights, and I will mention just a few of them later on. But to start with, the Zambian Constitution. Part 3 of the Zambian constitution houses what is known as the Bill of Rights. For those who do not know, a Bill of Rights is basically a list of rights. And it runs, as far as human rights are concerned, from Article 11 to Article 24. You find several rights highlighted there, from the right to life to the protection against discrimination, and so many other rights in between. All those rights are very, very important, and they guide as far as fundamental rights and freedoms are concerned within this particular nation, guaranteeing that if you're within Zambia, you enjoy these rights, of course, with a little bit of limitation or derogation here and there. Article 25 provides that there are certain rights that are non-derogable and those that are derogable. Those rights that are non-derogable are those that cannot be suppressed, limited, or suspended. It could be the right to life. It can't be suspended. It can't be suspended. The right to life is one that cannot be, suspended or limited. Of course, there are also, prescriptions that are guaranteed under this particular article, that there are also derogable rights, the rights that are under Article 13, Article 16, Article 17, 19, 20, 21, and to 24. These rights are derogable. They can be limited, and they can be suspended. I'll give an example. During the COVID pandemic, there was a piece of legislation, delegated legislation, that was released, which regulated how meetings were supposed to be done. You're not supposed to be a particular number. Even movements were curtailed at the time. Don't move unnecessarily, and so on and so forth. Those were provided for because the law prescribes that the rights can be derogated. For example, the right to movement, or the freedom of movement, rather, freedom of association, rights which were mostly affected during that time. So that is what is known as a derogation. Now, the body of rights that are recognized in these provisions are justiciable, which means that you can go to court and claim that one of them has been violated and you seek for a remedy. Of course, this is provided for under Article 28, that you can go to the High Court and claim that your rights have been violated. But if it is other categories of human rights, it's very difficult, and it relies on a lot of things. For example, in the Mwanza and Another versus Attorney General decision, we saw the use of the concept of pardon me. We saw the use of judicial interpretation, being ultimately used to promote these human rights. Now, the court in that particular case took a very pragmatic approach to human rights protection, thus recognizing and implementing what is known as judicial activism when dealing with this particular matter, because essentially the matter dealt with the right to health and the right to proper food. But the applicants were able to loop those rights to the right to life, stating that if we don't have the right to health and we don't have the right to proper food or adequate food, our right to life is going to be infringed. And Article 28 says if there is even an intended violation or an immediate violation, which has not really happened, there is an urgent contravention of your rights, you can claim for protection. Thus, they went to court. These were prisoners who were living with HIV and AIDS, and when they went to court for human rights violations, they were still under detention, and they went before the High Court, and in fact, stated that our rights are actually being violated because we're given rotten beans and our medicine that comes is expired. So we need this honorable court to judge and declare that our rights have been violated and the state should do something about it. Of course, they won the case in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ordered that indeed their rights were violated and there's need for them to be vindicated. So you need to look into this particular case. It's very, very interesting. If you're a law student, take time to look into this particular case. Yeah, summaries of it if you don't want to read the full case, but I urge you to read the full case and you'll be able to appreciate this concept and beyond them. Then I said there are several human rights legislation that are here in Zambia. The Anti-Human Trafficking Act, of course, dealing with human trafficking itself as a human rights issue, because this is a gross violation of human rights issue. The international community has actually recognized this to be a very international issue. Then we have the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act, of course, dealing with GBV, which has got a very tight grip on our legal system, and specifically on our society. There is Persons with Disabilities Act, referring to persons with disabilities and their rights. And most recently, we've had the Children's Code Act and the Access to Information Act. These are all pieces of legislation. They are not exhaustive in themselves. There are a lot of other pieces that deal with human rights in the domestic legislation. Thus, as far as legislation is concerned, we seem to be moving at the right pace, and we're trying as much as possible as a country to create legislation that focus on human rights. Now, enforcement mechanisms are also another component that we can really try and appreciate in our legal system. So Article 230 of our Constitution, of course, the Constitutional Amendment Act of 2016, creates various enforcement mechanisms that focuses on human rights. One key component is the establishment of the Human Rights Commission. Of course, it's been there, but it was established under the Constitution. This particular body looks into several issues insofar as human rights are concerned, and it is the principal autonomous body that is responsible for investigating human rights violations and maladministration of justice. It's very, very important that you take note of this particular important commission. It is, in fact, one of the most important mechanisms of enforcement or institutions that focus on human rights. Insofar as human rights are concerned, it has three primary functions. That is the investigations of human rights abuses, proposing measures of preventing future abuses, and also visiting detention facilities to assess conditions under which these collection of facilities or detention centers are at, because there's a lot of human rights violations in these centers. So it has that particular obligation to do so, and that in fact is very, very important. Other than that, we've got the judiciary itself, the High Court of Zambia and the Supreme Court of Zambia, to be specific, which looked into vindication of human rights. This is provided for under Article 28 of the Constitution, part of the Bill of Rights, and these courts have been very instrumental in ensuring that human rights are actually protected. They are the principal judicial organs or judicial parts that deals with specifically human rights. Of course, one may be asking about the Constitutional Court, but the Constitutional Court's role, as far as the Constitution is concerned, is the interpretation of the constitutional provisions. And in fact, Article 128 that creates or confers jurisdiction upon the Constitutional Court does subject itself to Article 28. Thus, the High Court and the Supreme Court, per that particular provision, has, as far as human rights are concerned, ultimate jurisdiction to deal with human rights issues. And these, there are three examples that I've cited here that are, example cases that have seen the light of day in the court of law, and they have dealt with key issues. They're not exhaustive, but some of them includes the Stanley Kangaipe and another versus Attorney General, a case decided in 2010, which dealt with mandatory medical testing, which was held by this court that it is a violation of the protections that are found under Article 15, which is a protection against inhuman and degrading treatment. So you can't be subjected to mandatory medical testing. There's a very important rule in medicine and medical law, that there should be consent, informed consent of the patient. And thus, this particular case, in fact, just adds to that body of, or to that corpus of law that talks about, human rights protection, as well as, human rights protection and the medical side of it. So you can't be subjected to mandatory medical testing, even if it is at work, because this particular case dealt with individuals who are part of the Zambian military force. So you can't subject them to mandatory medical testing, and neither can you subject any other person to mandatory medical testing. It is a violation of that protection. Then there's John Banda versus the People, a case that saw, the dealing away of something that maybe some of us experience, the 90s kids and below that, those who experienced corporal punishment. So corporal punishment, even just, getting beaten in school by your teachers and so on and so forth, that included corporal punishment. So this particular case ruled that out as equally falling within the prohibitions under inhumane and degrading treatment. So even now you can see that, your children can't be maimed at school, because it is a violation of this particular protection, and the courts have pronounced themselves on this matter. So if such happens, please go to court. And then there's Mwanza and Beni versus Attorney General, which I referred to earlier on, looked into the right to food, the right to health, which was tied to the right to life. So if you violated these two rights, or one of these two rights, it eventually violates the right to life, and because of this, it became justiciable. There are also other enforcement mechanisms. There are other bodies that look into the enforcement of human rights. Here in Zambia, the Office of the Public Protector, who was formerly called the Ombuds or Ombudsman, the Ombuds or the Ombudsman or the Investigator General. All these titles were associated with this office, but it looks into principally maladministration. So if your human rights have been violated as a result of maladministration, this is the right office to go to, and you get the requisite help that you need insofar as human rights are concerned. Then there's also judicial complaints. The Judicial Complaints Commission, the JCC, which looks into complaints against judicial officers, ensuring accountability within the judiciary itself. So it is like a body that is outside the judiciary, ensuring that members of the judicial body are made accountable. Then there's the Police Public Complaints Commission. I don't know if everybody knows this, but the Constitution of Zambia creates this particular commission, which focuses on complaints that are made against the police. So if you have grievances against police officers, this is the right authority that you go to, and you will get your remedy. So instead of you taking the long road to court and all that, you can basically just go to this body and you get your remedy there. Then we have the police's victim support unit, dealing with issues such as gender-based violence, which equally is inclusive in the human rights issues. So you can go to the victim support unit and you get the help that you need. One thing that I want to emphasize on, one mechanism that I want to emphasize on, is the media. The media is a very powerful tool insofar as human rights protections are concerned. Now, a lot of us have got access to social media platforms, and some of us have got huge followings, and we can share whatever we can. But the media here is focusing on those people with the responsibility, to those people with the responsibility to share this information and really promote human rights in one way or the other. We've got media channels that share human rights violations, and also we've got media channels that cover these stories in the courts of law. Maybe it could be that you've not received your right compensation after the state has chosen to mandatorily acquire your land. Of course, you can't serve an injunction on the state. You can't serve an injunction on the state. So you go to the media platforms, and they help you gain gain the support of the people, and in so doing, you are able to get your human rights vindicated. So the media is a very powerful tool. Media is a very powerful tool and very powerful enforcement mechanism that can, to a greater extent, force the hands of government to ensure that they actually provide, especially when it comes to these rights that are not included in our Bill of Rights. So you'd find, social media or media groups and media broadcasting covering several issues that are affecting the community as a whole. You might find that maybe they capture, they capture various clips on what is happening in the hospital, and you'd find that after this goes out, the government takes a positive step. It is because this particular media platform or broadcasting has reminded them of their duty to provide, and in one way or the other, or indirectly, the human rights of the patients are protected in that way. So this is a very, very important tool. And as somebody who uses social media, please, I urge you to use it positively. It's a very, very important and very powerful tool. If you can use social media, positively and responsibly, I'm sure a lot of things can and will be avoided. Otherwise, a huge following is not really worth it if you're going to find yourself in problems. So please, this too is very, very important to understand. So far as human rights are concerned, it is better you share about human rights. It's better you share about their importance in the community than you getting yourself involved in the violation of another's right through maybe defamation of character. So that's just a piece of advice. Now let us proceed. Now, I did say that Zambia is not an island, and it is part of an international community. So Zambia has chosen to intentionally tie itself to various human rights instruments, and because of this, it's subjected itself to regulation by regional bodies as well as international bodies. There are several of them, and there's so much that can be taught about this topic as a topic on its own. But I've just picked a few things to just emphasize on the status of human rights as we have seen or learned throughout the session. So Zambia on the regional level principally submits itself to what is known as the Banjul Charter, or the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So in the African region, Zambia has in fact ratified the charter that I've just referred to, the Banjul Charter. And the Banjul Charter creates two important institutions. There's the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and the African Court on Human and People's Rights. These are regional bodies that oversee member states' compliance with the charter. So the charter includes, these three generations of rights, and as states or as member states to the charter, we are called upon to do what? To ensure that the contents of this charter are not violated. And when it is so done, we can actually be taken to court. And as an example, the Legal Resources Foundation did in fact file in a complaint against Zambia in 1998, revolving around human rights violations. So that is just an example. So it doesn't just end here in Zambia, in the Supreme Court of Zambia. It can actually go to the regional level. And aside from that, we also have the international level. The international level looks at it from two different angles. There's a charter-based system and the treaty-based system. When we're talking about the charter-based system, we're talking about charters that, regulate the global community, such as the United Nations Charter, which has a Human Rights Council there, which looks into specifically human rights issues. So when Zambia becomes part of an international agreement, one that is not regional, one that is not bilateral, but one that regulates the entire globe, it has got a right to do what? To make that particular charter, and its content, be upheld legally within the domestic region. And we've seen there's a case there, Henry Kalenga versus Zambia, a communication that was filed in the Committee of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, an international covenant that is signed by Zambia in the treaty-based charter-based system. So in the charter-based system, the Zambia can be subjected to the Security Council, or it could be subjected to the ICJ, being the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. So it's very, very important that we look into these parts of human rights action and take our time to look into them. It's very, very, very important. Hopefully, when we have maybe a second lesson, we might look into international and regional protections, and then go very, very far in digging into this topic, and we'll be able to learn quite a lot. But for now, I'll leave it there. Now, what are the challenges and weaknesses that we have in this system as it stands now? Now, the Bill of Rights, as I stated, to start with, the Bill of Rights is limited. And this could be attributable to Zambia's inability to domesticate international treaties. So despite Zambia signing a lot of treaties, such as the ICE SCR, the convention that protects international convention that protects the economic, social, and cultural rights, it has not domesticated it in our legal system. Despite having various pieces of legislation that across board protects economic, social, and cultural rights, these rights have not been given the status that they actually deserve. If you look at two legal systems, the Kenya's legal system and South Africa's legal system, insofar as the constitution is concerned, their constitution is very wide. Their Bill of Rights is wide. It includes group rights, it includes second generation and first generation as well. Attempts have been made here in Zambia on multiple occasions, I think 3 times now. First one that was done during the transitional period after Chiluba took over. Secondly, we saw this happening in 2016, where the referendum failed, and equally the infamous Bill 10. There has been multiple attempts to expand the Bill of Rights, but all have been futile. So there's need for us to include, third generation rights in our constitution, and also second generation rights. So this is a challenge that we have currently as far as the human rights system is concerned. We need to have a very, very broad Bill of Rights in order for human rights to be protected. So this limitation is in fact a challenge and a weakness in the system. The margin that is there for the Bill of Rights is too small. Now we got derogations of constitutional rights. Those taking away those limitations, those derogational clauses of suspensions of human rights are very in themselves. They are a challenge, and this is because even their bringing about is very subjective to the executive wing of government. For example, if you were to declare a state of emergency, the president only can make that declaration. Of course, there's no secondary assessment that needs to be made, and any other requirement that can be made. So these derogations, it's more like open doors for violations of human rights. Because right now, as we're speaking, there is somebody who's actually trying to get a permit. Maybe not right now, but during this time, there's somebody who's trying to get a permit for an event. And the permit system has been, relegated. It's been removed entirely. But the police will require you to get a permit. So what exactly is going on? This is a limitation because of the derogations themselves. So instead of you just basically going to notify the police, they'll tell you you need to get a permit. And they're still referring to it as a permit. And yet the law has changed. So the derogations open up doors for violations of human rights. And there's need to ease them or entirely get rid of them. Then there are legal constraints that are placed by legislation and bills. For this one, I'll specifically refer to bills. Zambia so far has stated in 2 important cases, one, the Nkumbula versus the Attorney General, and later on, the Constitutional Court's judgment in Bill 10. In those 2 cases, the Constitutional Court says they don't have jurisdiction to determine matters relating to bills. Of course, something that I totally disagree with. and I disagree with it, because the Constitutional Court is not really built to just be bound by the Constitution itself. The spirit of the Constitution is not just the text itself. It is also principles of constitutionalism. So there are principles such as, the rule of law, which could expand and go beyond, take the powers of the Constitutional Court beyond just the margin lines and the texts of the literal text of the Constitution itself. So these powers that are conferred upon the courts, or that are conferred upon the bodies, they in some way or the other constrain the enjoyment of human rights to a point that in certain times the courts will fold their hands when a party is going to vindicate their rights, that we don't actually have powers to decide on that because it is a bill, which is not supposed to be the case, right? Of course, in my opinion, it's not supposed to be the case. Then we have economic instability. So a lot of bodies, including the Human Rights Commission, have claimed that, well, of course, I don't know the veracity of this statement, but I've claimed, and several reports have stated, that they are underfunded. There's a lot of underfunding when it comes to these commissions, and understandably, the economy of the country is not doing so well, and it's not been doing so well for a long time. But these economic, constraints, in some way or the other, limit the effectiveness of the human rights system. Because, as an example, the Human Rights Commission's other objective is to facilitate for trainings, facilitate for civic engagement. But then, if there are limited resources, how are they going to be doing that? So there is need for promoting and protecting human rights through civic empowerment, through civic engagement, and there's need for more funding in these very important, very important organizations or stakeholders insofar as human rights are concerned. Then there's the issue of ineffective sensitization, which just branches off from there. Ineffective sensitization, something that actually affected the 2016 attempt to expand the Bill of Rights. There was really very, very little or minimal sensitization on the importance of economic, social, and cultural rights. And I would love for the country to take a step further in educating the public about these economic, social, and cultural rights before they take the move of expanding the Bill of Rights. The people must know why claim rights, why the rights to work, why the right to health. Why should we include this in the Bill of Rights? Why should we include this in the bill? That should be the move that the politicians must make, the government must make. And this should at least let us see support from the politicians who are on the opposition side. Let us see support. Let us scrutinize the rights that are going to be put into the Bill of Rights. To what extent do they benefit the people? Because that is the important factor. To what extent do they benefit the people? And from there, we can take it on. Let us educate the people about the benefits that these present, and not gimmicks to get more power. No, let us get to inform the people about claim rights. Let us take each step to educate them on each and every one of those rights. Because if there's no civic education, if there's no civic engagement, that particular process will equally end in the same way that the 2016 and the 2021 and the other attempt that was made to expand the Bill of Rights in the same way, to no avail. So there's need for effective sensitization. Let us get to the public. Let us get to the community. Let us translate. Let us ensure that even the uneducated is informed of human rights. If that can be done, we can basically, address this challenge. It's very, very important. Now, lastly, opportunities and prospects. Now, to maximize on the opportunities that are presented by the Zambian legal system so far, There's need for civic engagement initiatives to be properly funded. We need to increase awareness campaigns about human rights amongst the general populace. There's a very famous saying in the Bible, my people suffer because they lack knowledge. So there's need for knowledge to be dispersed of in the community. The community needs to be informed of the whys, and they need to be informed of the importance of this practice that we're calling civic education. Other than that, there's need for an expansion of the Bill of Rights, of course, the inclusion of economic, social, and cultural rights, and also group rights, the right to a healthy environment. Of course, it's there in the EMA, the Environmental Management Act, but there's need for it to be included in the Bill of Rights so that the government can be made accountable whenever this right has not been prescribed, because it is their obligation. And even us as individuals, we need to ensure that we take a different route. Of course, there's also another thing that I haven't put on the points. We need to also provide for, not only vertical application of human rights, but also horizontal application. Because here in Zambia, you can only sue the government for human rights violations. Let us also provide for a system that helps us to claim human rights violations from other people that are equally humans, just like you and I. Citizens themselves, they need to sue themselves for human rights violations. And this is not to exacerbate the situation, but to also ensure that each and every one of us is made accountable to each other. Okay? We need to be accountable to each other for human rights violations. So there's need for that particular application to equally be included in the bill, in the constitution, whatever document is prescribing for enforcement. And there's need for strengthening civil society engagement. So the other thing as well, civil societies need to be engaged. There is need for another pair of eyes to look into these laws, and civil societies or SOCs play a very important SCOs rather play a very important role in ensuring that the government is made accountable. Thus, whenever there's a draft that is made, it includes human rights. These stakeholders must be consulted. They must be consulted because they have experts, they have various individuals that represent various parts of the society. Let us make it inclusive. Insofar as creating policy is concerned, insofar as creating legislation is concerned, let us make it inclusive. If that is done, the human rights system that we have right now can be made to be beneficial for everyone and to everyone, because these second pair of eyes will be able to see beyond the biases that legislators have when they're creating these laws, or when they're creating these laws. So the presumed biases will be dealt with. Okay, then we have the last one, which is ensuring that the legal framework is effectively implemented at all levels of the government. So it is not just about creating laws. We have a lot of policies, we have a lot of legislation, we have a lot of these written works. Let us put those works into operation. When we say EMA, that is the Environmental Management Act, which is placed under ZIMA, Zambia Environmental Management Agency, that particular body will have an obligation to do civic engagement and civic education insofar as environmental rights are concerned. Let us fund them. Let us ensure that they do this particular objective, and not just flyers being shared on the streets. Let them go into the streets and inform them. The environment right now is suffering. We are all equally suffering the consequences of climate change. Let them take the step towards that. Let them take the steps towards informing the public of the importance of ensuring that our environments are made clean and healthy. Let us emphasize on the right to a clean and a healthy environment. In the prisons as well. This right is for all. Let us ensure that this right is given its effectiveness. And not only this right, but all the rights that are there. The rights relating to persons with disabilities, the rights with regards to children. Let us take the step in ensuring that we don't just create policy, we don't just create legislation, but we put this particular law into effect. If there is need for punishment of people who violate these principles, let the punishments be seen so that people know that these particular actions are contrary to what the law prescribes. If that can be done, then indeed this particular human rights system, as we know it, is going to be so well. We are not the first who's going to do this, and definitely we're not going to be the last. So it is a very important topic that needs to be talked about every now and then. It needs to be talked about every day in every sector. Human rights are important for you and I. They're important for our well-being, our protection, and our claims. If you are to live in this world without human rights, we will not be different from animals. This is why human rights exist. You are breathing right now, sleeping peacefully in your homes, enjoying the internet, enjoying your cup of coffee. Tomorrow you wake up, you go to church, or if you're not part of any denomination, you will sit home. You go out with your friends and drink and come back at night. You're enjoying all those privileges because human rights are in existence. Okay, looking at it from the human rights angle, you are enjoying those things because human rights are in existence. If it wasn't, for human rights, you would be forced to go to church, or you'd be forced to stay home. You'd be forced to do a lot of things because human rights are not there. If you look at it from the historical point of view, you will see slavery being legal because human rights were not there at the time. Until human rights were discovered, that's when they started banning some of these things. So it's important that you drive with knowledge. You ensure that these rights are just not put in vain. Let us take the step to inform. Let us take the step to educate, and let us take the step to equip. Thank you so much, and have a very lovely remainder of the day. If you watch this video, you like it, please hit that subscribe button, like the video, share it, and also leave a question. If you have any questions, I'll be addressing the questions. My team will also help with addressing some of the questions later on. So thank you so much for joining the live stream, and God bless.
We won't relent. We will fight until the end. We have been sent to protect and to defend.
We won't relent. We will fight until the end.
We have been sent
to protect and to defend. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river,
till only freedom is found. We count the cost.
we will pledge our very lives. All nation lost, but the kingdom will last. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river, till only freedom is found. Let justice flow like a river, flow from the peaks to the ground. Let justice flow like a river, till only freedom is found.
The coastlines will know. The coastlines will know.
The coastlines will know your justice.
The islands will know. The islands will know.
The islands will know your justice.